Man here on Kiwi, coming up to 20 minutes away from 9 now, and it's time to get opinions from publicaddress.net, man, the hard news blog there, Public Address. It's Russell Brown and also Media 7 show on TVNZ7. Morning, Russell.
Good morning.
And today, first up, we're talking about sub-editors and the situation with sub-editors, where they're going, both Australia and New Zealand. But first up, what is the role of a sub-editor at a newspaper?
A sub-editor, it's not often well understood, and people talk about subs, in blog discussions and that sort of thing, and I always get the feeling that like three-quarters of the audience has no idea what that means.
Sure.
A sub-editor is the person who, in the first instance, receives a reporter's copy and probably first off corrects the spelling, then works on the copy a bit, checks it for factual errors, and this is a really important part of the sub's job, and the reason that subs tend to stick around newspapers and magazines a lot longer than the actual writers do is because that's where the institutional knowledge is.
Yeah.
Which is really important at things like regional papers, where you might have a reporter who's through, out of journalism school, through for 2 years or something like that. The sub is the person who knows how to spell the news name.
Yes.
Or knows that a certain person who may make a lot of noise is a well-known vexatious complainer and should be treated in that vein.
So one would assume that a sub-editor would be in the same room as where the news is being made.
As has been the tradition. But that's actually all changed a lot in the past, say, 5 years. First at the New Zealand Herald, when a lot of the work on APN publications, which would be the Herald, the Listener, I think 7 regional papers and a few other publications, a lot of those got handed over to a central subbing hub. It was outsourced to a company called PageMasters. And if you talk to anyone in a newsroom at one of those publications, they don't like PageMasters, because you don't know who you're dealing with. You've lost all the wisdom of the sub-editor. And sure, we've listened to the other side as well. Towards this week's Media 7 show, it becomes difficult to sustain financially as newspaper revenues fall. Oddly enough, circulations aren't falling, but the revenues are falling because of Trade Me, basically, because the classified income isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So newspapers do have to work out more efficient ways of doing things, and I guess some of this stuff is going to be inevitable. But what's happened in the last week is that Fairfax in Australia, who already centralised quite a lot of their own subbing in New Zealand and own nearly half of PageMasters, have said that a couple of regional papers in Australia will lose about 50 jobs, 50 to 60 jobs, because the work will go over to a subbing hub in New Zealand.
And because we're cheaper, right?
Yeah, because we're cheaper. We're the call centre, basically. But I think there must already be people here thinking, well, you guys didn't raise much of a fuss when a lot of New Zealand subbing work went over to PageMasters in Australia, because there's a PageMasters operation in Auckland, but some of the work, particularly for the Listener, like the Listener TV listings, get done in Brisbane, and that can be problematic because there's no cultural understanding of New Zealand television. And it's surprising how much of a difference that can make. And there are across APN, there are these issues. Some of it's been rolled back, but it's a fact of life now. But it's a big, big deal in Australia, and more so, quite clearly, because these jobs have gone offshore. And there's already been a snap strike. I've had a chat by satellite with the head of the journalism part of the Australian Media Union, and I get the impression they're not going to back down. So it's kind of interesting, and it is a good time to talk about how these things work. So we've got Rick Neville, who brought in PageMasters at APN, and Robin Martin, who's the head of journalism at the Western Institute of Technology in New Plymouth, where Fairfax runs a subbing hub. So hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on this.
Okay, look forward to that. Also on the show, you're talking about superheroes and the people that dream them up.
Yeah, this is a story that Jose Barbosa has wanted to do for quite a while, and if you follow Dylan Horrocks, he's written about it quite a bit as well. Dylan's off watching the transit of Venus, so we couldn't have him on.
Hopefully where it's not cloudy.
Yeah. Actually, I must say, Toby Manhire of The Listener has just tweeted that it's dawned fine in Gisborne. It's probably the only place in the country.
That's where the conference is?
That's where the conference is, yes.
Yeah.
So they might be lucky. They might be able to see it. Although, of course, not with the naked eye, because you'll burn your eyeballs. There are filters you can get. It's probably a little bit late now.
If you've got a welder's helmet.
Yeah, something like that,
yeah.
Yes, because it's Venus going across the face of the sun, so don't be looking at the sun.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the comics thing is interesting because the people who created some of our favourite superheroes haven't, in general, done very well out of it. The creators of Superman sold the rights in 1938 to DC for $130. And they've just, the estate of one of them has actually just won a court case in the US, in which a judge has said, actually, no, these people have to have some kind of ownership in this, because this was a clearly unfair contract at the time when you look at the money that's been made. Jack Kirby, on the other side of the great comics divide at Marvel, created most of the characters in the Avengers movie, the Joss Whedon movie, that's done incredibly well worldwide, and yet gets nothing. The big exception there actually is Batman. Bob Kane, who created Batman, had a lawyer in the family, and he had a better deal than everyone else because they actually, had some foresight. So not everyone is in this position. Also, Bob Kane was the uncle of Ron Kane, who is one of the great American New Zealand music collectors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, Ron Kane used to turn up in New Zealand quite a lot back in the 80s. Quite an interesting guy, actually. One of those sort of, he was a train spotter and a geek before those things were fashionable.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that should be an interesting feature.
Yeah, no, that should be good, actually. And Jose's done a track on that I think Jose Barbosa is absolutely on a roll for Media 7 at the moment. I thought his track last week was really funny, and I'm really looking forward to this one. And I'll also be talking to a guy called Adrian Kinnaird about the rebellion, because there have been some major comic creators saying we're not going to work for DC anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very political sphere.
Isn't it? And then there's the two houses, DC and Marvel, fighting it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, another thing that's popped up over the past week or so is something called the audience.co.nz. Tell us about that.
Yeah. About 5 years ago, Andrew Dubber and I wrote a somewhat rambling paper for NZ On Air, pointing out that the focus of music discovery was shifting away from radio and television towards the internet, which seems a commonplace thing to say now, but I think we kind of could see what was happening.
Yeah.
And basically in that paper we said, NZ On Air, you have to work out what you do about this. And I think with the audience, which is run by the same people who bring us amplifier.co.nz,
right,
they've actually made a pretty good stab at it. I think, well, the proof of it is that I sat down last week and found a bunch of stuff that I didn't know about before. And that, I think, is exactly what this sort of site's supposed to do.
So is it essentially a bunch of tracks all displayed very nicely on the front page?
Yeah. You
go through, discover, and you vote?
You vote, yeah. And that vote determines the ranking in the chart, which makes it quite different from, say, it looks quite similar visually to a site called We Are Hunted. But if you look at how the We Are Hunted chart is created, it's some sort of secret source that they're not telling you about. It's like, trust us, we know what's going on. So I think the way the audience works is better. There's, of course, a little bit of spice in that 10 times a year the most voted for unreleased track will go up for a $10,000 Making Tracks grant from NZ On Air, which is good, but it kind of, I think it raises the stakes somewhat.
Yeah.
If it was just a little chart that you're at the top of, I don't think people would get quite so anxious about it. And I think there are one or two things to be ironed out. The first radio chart that came out of it last week, unfortunately, was compiled an hour after it launched, so it was full of beta data, which is unfortunate.
So
I have to say though that the artists, if you look at them on Twitter, are really enjoying actually finding a new audience. Like Zulka Hartung, the ukulele player and singer, seems to have found lots of people. I'm delighted to have found Louis the Zoo, who I'd heard of. A 17-year-old born in Zimbabwe, living in Auckland. Man, he's good.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's been very good at promoting his tune on there, which I suppose is the point as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key part of it.
Yeah.
I suppose the danger is that you get people who are so good at marshalling a social media following and promoting their tunes that they go up the charts, and they may not actually be the best.
It was one thing I garnered from my 13 years of experience in radio, Russell, is that sometimes it's the loudest musicians that are not necessarily the best musicians.
Yes, and that's always a danger with this. But I think they can navigate that. I have to say also that in the past few days, I've been on Spotify and trying to work out what I think of it, looking at what artists get, and I've been coming around to the view that actually radio is not so bad, because from what I can tell, the APRA payments from radio play, performance rights money, compares quite favourably with what artists get on Spotify from having multiple plays. And
some radio companies might argue too favourably, Russell.
Yes, possibly. yes. No, radio always moans about that. But it's still quite clear that if you really want to support an artist and they don't have a Kickstarter project like Amanda Palmer, going to somewhere where you know that they get nearly everything that you pay, i.e. Bandcamp, is still probably the best way of doing it.
Yeah, and the number one best way is to buy a CD at the gig, direct off the artist.
Exactly. No, that's where people really make money. Yeah. So
and just as a note, so this the audience.co.nz, that's been funded out of the NZ On Air Digital Media
Fund, which I think has had a few misfires. I don't think that funding's been terribly well directed.
Although, have you checked out mixtape.co.nz?
Only briefly.
I think it's really, really worthwhile to. It's completely different to Spotify or Radio or anything like that, in that you upload your music.
Yes.
So you actually do feel like, because I was a little bit sceptical about it at first, but I felt the enjoyment of actually sharing music that was on my computer and legally putting it online.
Yeah, true. I mean, in theory, that is also a part of the Spotify experience as well. If you follow all your friends on Spotify, you'll see what they're putting up as playlists. But with everyone getting on board at the same time, no one's got any detailed playlists at the moment. So it's been a bit difficult, actually.
Yeah.
But I think it's most welcome, the audience, and they've got a few things to iron out. But it's certainly. I think NZ On Air has gotten it right this time.
Cool. Hey,
Right.
Russell, thanks very much. Talk to you next week.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye.
Russell Brown at publicaddress.net, Media 7 Show TV.